Hey everyone, Bainbridge Radio, episode number 439. Big Tom is in the house. Tom, hello, Q&A show, we're in.
How you doing, Ben?
By the way, we have reached the bottom of the pile with all questions. My email inbox is empty.
That's amazing. We actually did Q&A shows and that, like, enough of them to have chipped away at it.
Yeah, when we first started the show,
of
there was obviously a bazillion questions, and as we've gone on and we've covered a lot of stuff, the questions have sort of, dried up a bit as we've basically gone over an awful lot of stuff. So if you've been a follower, listener of the show for a while, and you're like, do you know what, Ben, you haven't talked about this? Well, do send that question in to bencoomber@gmail.com, because at the moment, the Q&A show does not exist, and what will have to happen is I'll have to fire up a Skype with Tom. I'll have to roll a little hand grenade topic under the table, and we'll just have to have one of our rants like we've done many times before. So you can save us from that by writing questions into the show.
It's a good idea. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a question, I suppose. It can just be a topic that you want us to talk about. Like, it could be, oh, you haven't talked about this, have a go. Rather than, I've got a specific problem. I think a lot of the questions we get seem to be, oh, I've got an issue that I'd like your help with, which is fantastic, but people can, if you don't have an issue, you're still welcome to ask us a question.
With where the show is at this point in time after like 6 years, I think it's important to get as specific as possible. We've had an awful lot of shows, and I don't want to devalue these questions because there's tons of value in these questions, but where people have written in and they're like, do you know what, I'm doing this, I'm training this way, I'm eating like this, like I'm at a roadblock, and because we've been over so much of that stuff, and we've talked about recovery and we've talked about sleep, make sure you've broken down all those critical steps before you ask the question. And when I teach seminars, I talk about this kind of from a Google test perspective. Like, if you typed into Google a question and you're more confused, once you've done a little bit of research off the back of that question, then you haven't probably asked a specific question. So I always use the example of sleep. Like, if you put into Google, how do I sleep better? Well, there's an awful lot of directions that can go in. There's your functional sleep environment in terms of like the bed, the duvet, how cool the room is, all that kind of stuff. Then you've got kind of your partner and your interaction. You've got your mindset before you go off to sleep. You've got the build up to sleep. There's a lot going on in that. But if you were to type into Google, I'm really struggling because I feel really hot at night, then that can actually look at your physiology, then the functional environment, and then maybe what you're doing in the lead up. And I'm not saying you would get a really specific answer, but you're a lot closer. So all I'd want you to do before you wrote into the show is just kind of go through a couple of critical steps to go, okay, they've kind of covered this a little bit before, but I want to take it in this direction. And that will allow us to keep evolving the show and help you as much as possible, because the last thing you guys want is like, oh, they've talked about that before. Like, come on guys, get some new material.
All fair comments. There's nothing worse than hearing the same thing over and over.
Yes, and we do try our best. Sometimes it is very important to go over some stuff, because if we look at the world today, there's still a lot of people struggling with their health, with their weight, with their mindset, and quite often it is the basics that it ends up coming back to: sleep, how we're managing kind of our work-life balance, the food that we eat, and the consistency we have with the food that we eat. Like, all of these are really the problems that most people struggle with. And don't get me wrong, everyone's got their reasons, everyone's got their environments, but it often comes back to the basics. So when we repeat things, it's because it's really freaking important.
Definitely. I mean, you can't, I suppose, overemphasize certain things that we talk about. Like, when we do talk about sleep, when we talk about making sure you're thinking about your training in a healthy way, and you've got a good relationship with what it is that you do. And I think, yeah, that's a useful thing to hear over and over. But yeah, let's have some different questions.
Anyway, 2 announcements before we start. First one is the next BTN Practical Academy intake will be in September. We've moved it forward from November. We basically said to everyone, hey, is November a good time of year for us to launch the course? A lot of people said no, September. So we were like, okay, we'll do September. So we could do it. So hopefully other people can. So if you're expecting to get on our next year-long nutrition course, then it will be, if you're expecting November, it will be September. So as ever, our doors are open. You can leave a deposit, you can get on board with the course and become a qualified nutrition coach. Second announcement is there is a new plant-based cookbook on the Awesome Supplements website. So if you'd like a load of smoothie, snack, breakfast, lunch, dinner ideas, because you want to incorporate a little bit more plant-based nutrition into your diet, then head over to awesomesupplements.co.uk, go onto the product page, and you will find a cheeky, beautifully designed new cookbook that we did with a partner. We did it with Tribe Training, and they helped us with that book. They pretty much wrote it. Like, when I say helped us, they wrote it. We kind of worked with them a bit, made it look pretty, and said, let's get this out to the world. So yeah, next BTN Academy, September, plant-based nutrition cookbook, awesomesupplements.co.uk. Tom, let's go.
Let's go. So, first question. Hey, Ben and Tom. Been listening to you since day dot, and just want to say I've learned a lot over the past few years, so thank you. Anyway, to the point. At the beginning of 2017, I went onto the keto diet, started exercising a lot, and became conscious of the way that I looked. Unfortunately, having a very addictive personality, I became obsessed with the outcome, and overall I lost around 4 stone, which then took me into anorexia. Although very visible, this wasn't really sinking in, and I kept on going even though I was at a very unhealthy weight. I got to around 48 kilos, and I'm 5'8", now a 26-year-old female. After a very tough few months, I started gaining a healthier mindset and stopped the cardio. I still carried on with the weight training, which helped the number on the scales increase gradually. Now, 18 months on, I'm at a much healthier, but still not healthiest, weight of 56 kilos. So my question is, although I'm of a much better mindset, the weight only seems to be going onto my mid area, i.e. stomach, which is fine, but my legs and arms are still very thin. I train upper once a week, lower twice a week, as well as 5x5 compounds twice a week, so 5 days a week overall, no cardio apart from walking. I don't track my calories anymore, but I think it's around 2,200 to 2,300, and a lot of carbs are involved. I suppose I'm asking for some guidance on how I can put more on other parts of my body, or is this not possible? As you have said previously, you cannot spot which area you put on. We'll be grateful for any info. Thank you, Nicola.
So this is a cool question, because on the surface we've kind of talked about this a little bit before, but actually for me, and we'll see where Tom wants to go with this, I want to take this question in a slightly different direction and kind of talk about the real value of kind of a dedicated bodybuilding approach to training. Now, I have a certain physical frame, as does Tom, and there would have been periods in our life where we've gone, do you know what? I want to alter that physical frame a little bit. You know, I'd like to maybe look a little bit broader. I'd maybe like to have a little bit, bigger legs, or, whatever it is. And this is where bodybuilding has its real value. We have the ability to go in the gym, and don't get me wrong, this can take a long time for some people, depending on your genetic ability to build muscle, your frame. Like, some frames will only limit, a certain amount of muscle mass in certain areas, your environment, your sleep, your training, all that kind of stuff. Now, when we look to kind of build our body up, when we put on body fat, a lot of people will gain it around the stomach quite quickly. And depending on your frame, it might look kind of more odd quicker, if you know what I mean. So if you're really slim and you put on a bit of weight and it all goes onto the belly, it will look like even more because you're really slim. If you're a lot broader guy and you put a bit more around the waist, because you're broad, you just wouldn't notice it as much. So for example, I feel personally I carry body fat a lot better now because I have a lot more muscle. I'm broader. Like, if I put on half a stone on my belly, you probably wouldn't even notice it that much because I've got larger pecs and shoulders now. So if I was wearing a t-shirt, it kind of just all like taper in. And what I feel Nicola kind of maybe needs to look at now is, just taking a compassionate look at her body. It's not a negative thing. It's not to say, oh God, my arms and my legs are really skinny. I want to change it. I hate them. It's like, okay, I'm a pretty slim person. Actually, I'd like to improve that. So I'm going to get into the gym and I'm going to work on a program that looks to really target X areas of the body. And it doesn't mean we neglect other areas of the body. We just put more focus on it. So at the moment, I'm personally trying to build more leg mass than I am upper body mass. So I'm trying to train legs quite hard twice a week in the gym compared to my upper body where I'm only kind of training it once. So for me, I'm just trying to push my volume and my focus into the area that I want to improve the most. So with Nicola, it might be, okay, Nicola, what do you want to improve? Okay, perhaps we should put a lot more intention into that style of training on those areas of the body so that you can look to build that. And of course, your nutrition and your recovery has to support that with good sleep and good eating. But I thought that was a really valuable way to actually talk about people getting in the gym and saying, hey, I want to improve this and I'm going to spend a good, and this might be like 12, 18, 24, 36 months of like dedicated training towards a certain area of the body if we do genuinely want to look a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you say, you can absolutely. So the what Nicholas said here, we said previously, you cannot spot which area you put on. I think the message has not quite been picked up there. So you can definitely emphasize where you want to build muscle. Like, you see guys do this in the gym all the time. You see dudes walking around with big chest, big arms, and skinny little legs. And that's basically just an unintentional version of choosing which area they put it on. Like, if you only train certain areas, only those certain areas will grow. The message, I think, there was probably that you can't choose where the fat comes off when you're losing fat, because you can't. Where the fat will come off is dictated primarily by genetics and your hormones, i.e. if you are a male versus a female, there will be different areas where fat will come off first, where fat will go on first, etc., etc. To get a little bit more into the question, though, so Nicholas says that she, where we at? Trains upper once a week, lower twice a week, as well as 555 compounds twice a week, so 5 days overall, no cardio apart from walking. I would question what it is that you're doing on the upper and lower sessions if you're saying that you do 5x5 compounds twice a week, because that would suggest that you're not doing compound sessions on the other 3 days. Now, I'm making an assumption there. It might just be the way that you've written the question. But the thing is, as a person who's only really just started trying to intentionally gain muscle and strength as opposed to training to lose fat, that means you're effectively a novice trainee, or at least a beginner. You say you're weighing 56 kilos at 5'8", that's quite lean, that's quite small. So I'm guessing that you haven't built a great deal of a strength base at the minute. And what that's telling me is that you would benefit a lot more from focusing a lot more on those basic movements and getting stronger at them. One of the issues that I see a lot of the time in the gym is that people will go and they will train upper body, they'll train lower body, they'll focus on specific muscle groups, but they haven't built that strength base initially. And the problem that you have there is that you'll be doing you'll be doing exercises that are not necessarily as effective as they could be, and you're not able to progress on them because you're not training in an efficient manner. And we need to remember that in order to build muscle as a person who's not an assisted athlete, literally the only way to do that is to get stronger within a given rep range on exercises. So if you want bigger arms, you need to be able to do, in a few months' time, more weight for 8 reps on curls than you can do right now. If you want to have bigger legs and you're choosing squats to do that, you need to be able to do a set of 6 in a few months' time with more weight than you can currently do a set of 6. And that needs to be the focus of your training. So at the minute, if you're saying to me that you're doing upper body, so a lower body twice a week plus 5x5 compounds twice a week, that's potentially 4 days per week that you're training lower body. But I would question you, during those 4 sessions, how effective is that training and how much stronger are you getting? Because usually, and again, I'm making an assumption here, I don't really know what your training looks like, I'm just basing this on the way that you've worded it. Usually I find people who are in a position that they've not been in the gym that long, they will progress a lot faster by literally doing 5x5 compounds or 4 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 10 or whatever the rep range is, 3 times per week, focusing not on upper body, lower body, just 3 full body training sessions per week, aiming to get strong on basic exercises. And if you were to do that, because you're able to get stronger, you're able to increase the weight on the bar because you're not doing wasted volume. A lot of the time, as I say, when people are training ineffectively, it's not that they're not training hard. I don't doubt that you do. It's that you're training in a manner that is inefficient for the goal of getting stronger. You might get sore, you might get tired, you might get a good pump, but if you're not getting stronger, all of that's sort of irrelevant. And so all of that extra volume can be considered to be junk volume. And if you're just instead stripping your training right down, doing less volume, but focusing on making that quality and getting stronger, then your legs will grow and your arms will grow because you're lifting more weight. At the minute, if you focus on, right, I'm going to put a bunch more volume into my legs or a bunch more volume into my arms because I want them to get bigger, I think that might not help you because you're probably doing enough volume right now. It's just not as effective as it could be because the training that you're doing is not geared towards the goal that you now have.
Nice. Nothing more to add, sir.
Cool.
I think
I'd also say, just as like a brief little thing before we move on to the next question, you don't track calories anymore, but you think it's around 2,200 to 2,300. It's awesome that you've come off of tracking calories. I'm not going to encourage you to go back onto tracking calories because you've obviously had a history of that not being the best thing for you. But what I would do is I would keep a written food diary of some description so you're aware of how much you are eating. And I would keep an eye on the scales as well. So you're not counting the numbers, you're just literally counting foods that you're eating and the portions that you're eating. And if the weight on the scale doesn't go up gradually, we're talking about pound a month, you might need to eat a bit more. 2,200 to 2,300 calories as a 56 kilo person training 5 times a week is not a lot of food.
Yeah, I mean, in this instance, Nicola, you need to be comfortable with your way of tracking your food because of your past with your nutrition, and you want to feel that you're in the right place. But in contrary to that, you also have a physical goal where you want to maybe build muscle, increase your performance, get stronger. And that does need a certain amount of detail within the nutrition to achieve that. Don't get me wrong. You can freestyle it. You can do whatever you want. But the more accuracy and the more data points we have, the more we can reliably predict the outcome. And that's the thing. Quite often in nutritional and training, coaching conversations, we're having a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm trying to do this and I'm doing that," and it's like, "Okay, cool. Well, what data points have you got?" It's like, "Well, I'm just getting in the gym and doing this, and I'm just doing that." And the problem is with that kind of, "I'm just doing this," it's like there's a nice amount of intention there. The energies are going in the right place, but without knowing the true progression, the true data points, what it looks like over the course of a week and a month, which that's what we need to look at, right? Training and nutrition takes quite a significant amount of time to actually see some of these changes. If we don't know what's happening over the course of the month, then the reality is we might not get to the outcome we want. And when you're looking at something like building muscle, we need to take a whole month and say, right, did we really progress our strength? Did we really have intensity through as many of those sessions as possible? Was our calorie intake, really as high as possible without putting on unwanted amounts of body fat? Was our sleep really good throughout the month? And we do have to look on a very macro scale. And that's the problem with the gym. And, there's an awful lot of people in the gym are kind of stuck in that place where, all the energy is going in the right direction. Like they're in the gym 4 days a week and their physique just sort of doesn't change. And it's because day to day, the kind of intention's sort of there. But when you look at it across the month, like the nutrition's up and down a bit, the intensity's up and down, the sleep's up and down. And that's where, you do end up getting those people that are just kind of like, they're doing all the right things. There's just not enough accuracy and detail to really get that expected result at the end of the month or, 3-month training block or whatever.
For sure. And I mean, to make what I said a little bit more concrete, because I think it was a bit vague, and to give you like an actionable something to do, I would probably advise checking out if you put into Google ice cream fitness 5x5, so the ice cream fitness 5x5, that's a very good beginner hypertrophy based strength training routine. It's written out as a program, so you get progression in there too. It's completely free. You can find it on YouTube. I've probably recommended that routine to more people than I can count. And it's very, very good for your first sort of 6 months of training. Once you've done that, then you can check out, on Awesome Supplements, we've got a intermediate training manual, which will be a very good progression from that. But I think right now, building that strength base is the important thing to do. And if you check out that 5x5 program by Ice Cream Fitness, ignore the name. That was from back in the day when everyone talked about ice cream for fitness.
Tom,
I think
how does that compare to the Beginner's Guide to Training that we wrote together that's on my website?
I think it's just a bit simpler, to be honest. The one that we wrote on your website, obviously we wrote it. It's good. You could check that one out too. Have a look at both, see where your options are. But I would definitely recommend after 6 months, check the intermediate guide on Awesome Supplements, whichever way that you decide to take it.
Yeah, there is that intermediate guide to lifting is on my website as well, bencoomer.com. So there's a beginner guide to training and an intermediate guide to training. And the beginner guide is free. Again, it's like you're kind of getting into the gym, you want to understand it better, you want to structure a good training program, you want to do the core lifts, then you can do that. It's free. Just download it, grab it. It's on bencoomer.com. And then the intermediate guide to lifting, I think, is £15. And again, there's a lot more detail on it from a nutrition and a training perspective. It talk about progressions. There's a 6-month training block in there as well. So, what you can do over a 6-month period. So for £15, you're getting a lot of education and you're getting 6 months worth of training programming. So that would be worthwhile looking into.
Awesome. So let's move on to question 2. So hi Ben, I'm a relatively new listener to your brilliant podcast and I'm only about 50 episodes in, so sorry if you've covered this issue elsewhere. I just can't see anything in the titles that sounds like you have. I'm looking for information on how women should train after an abdominal hysterectomy. I had my surgery a year ago. I have little money to pay for a coach and some initial advice, but none of those I've spoken to locally were confident to advise RE weight training after the hysterectomy, and I really need someone who I can trust. For context, it's worth me saying that I've had a difficult relationship with food for a lot of my life. I actually know a reasonable amount about nutrition and how to eat healthily, but I have a historical tendency to turn to food to help deal with stress and anxiety, unsuccessfully. I've also only exercised off and on through my life, so that lack of consistency means I still very much consider myself a beginner to resistance training. I am now 37, 91 kilos and 5'5" and determined to get healthy. I have a young daughter who I want to be fit and healthy for, and I also want to be a good example for her in terms of diet and exercise. She means everything to me, and I'm helping her learn the art of balance and moderation is important to me. On a more selfish note, I'm also just tired of being lethargic and uncomfortable and desperately wanting to feel well and look good as well as run after my daughter comfortably. Since deciding that lasting change is needed, I've recently lost 6 kilos. Congratulations. Eating healthily with plenty of single ingredient foods, reducing but not eliminating carbs, and exercising 3 times a week, plus a Pilates mat at work class. I really enjoy resistance training, but I'm very unsure about what I should and shouldn't do in terms of resistance training because of my surgery. My absolute priority is not hurting myself. There's lots of info available for immediate recovery after a hysterectomy, so pelvic floor strengthening, etc., which I follow, but there's very little available about what is safe and not safe in the medium to long term, especially when it comes to lifting weights and certain movements which I may need to avoid long term. The gynae physio I saw after my op said to avoid an awful lot, including lifting weights over 10 kilos, full range of motion squats, and plank exercises. For the longer term, that feels very cautious to me, and I enjoy resistance training, so it would be sad to have to limit it significantly forever. I'm under no illusions that my journey back to full health and fitness is a long one, and I'm happy to start at the beginning, focusing on form and range of movement before adding weight. But I'd really appreciate advice on who could help me put together a program that will get me great results and keep me safe. I don't fancy a prolapse. Thank you for even reading this. I know you're busy, but must be getting knowledgeable advice is so important to me. Best wishes, Jan.
Yes, good question. And Jan, well done on the results so far. You've made some really good changes. Tom's made a good few notes on the hysterectomy stuff, so I'll let Tom kind of start off on that. But one thing I will say is something that feels really prominent for you is where you feel you've been at mentally with your nutrition and training in the past. And if you feel this is something that you need to work on, you kind of almost feel like it's a little bit of a vulnerability, that you're almost worried that if a bit more stress and anxiety comes into your life that it might knock you off kilter. I would invest a little bit more of your learning time on this. So maybe you find a podcast that's very mindset focused and you can start to listen to lots of different sort of narratives and perspective around stress and anxiety and emotional eating and kind of dealing with stress. I'm a big proponent of, if there's a thing that you're struggling with particularly, spend a lot of your kind of educational self-development time on that thing, because if that's going to have the biggest impact to you kind of being happy and healthy, then it's worth spending that time on it. So although you're motivated to learn about training and nutrition and you want to kind of keep that ball moving, it sounds like you know enough for where you're at right now. And we'll kind of get into the progression thing and feeling your way through your kind of longer term recovery. But I would definitely focus a lot more of your educational focused sort of on the mindset topic. And there's loads and loads and loads of good podcasts out there on that. We've had good guests on here before, Richard Nichols, Dave Cottrell. There's loads of amazing people. And if you are still unsure, reach out to one of us on social media, and we can help with that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. So with the hysterectomy thing, the information that I have learned previously, because I've worked with a lady who had a hysterectomy, and from what I could find after looking over this question, pretty much goes along with what I had expected. So when a person has had a hysterectomy, of course, the time frame for this will depend on what kind of hysterectomy you've had. There are, as far as I can tell, 3 broad categories of hysterectomy. Each one is sort of a little bit more invasive than the next. Depends on whether you've just had your uterus removed or whether you've had more removed. But as far as I can tell, the longest time frame for expected recovery, complete recovery, is around 3 months. During that time, your pelvic floor is a little bit more vulnerable, as well as various internal musculature, and therefore it is important, as you mentioned, to be quite careful because you are at greater risk of prolapse. However, it's according to your question, and from what I can tell from what you've said, you've been doing all your rehab exercises. Rehab exercises, for those listening who've not looked into this, you want to be starting off with deep breathing. So you just basically want to become reconnected with your core musculature. So all that would involve is lying on your back, taking a deep breath, and as you breathe in, try to draw your abdominal wall towards your spine. Hold it there and then breathe back out. Don't hold your breath while you're doing that. But all you're doing there is you're re-engaging your ability to have conscious control over your core muscles. You need to make sure that you can create proper alignment when you stand up. So that's basically the way Jessie Mundell, who is a pre- and postnatal expert in the field, the way she describes this is to stack your ribs over your hips. So you want to be standing up nice and tall. You want to make sure that your head is pointing towards the ceiling, and you want to be able to stand there comfortably while having, funny enough, your ribs directly above your hips. What tends to happen with people who are postpartum is you will lean back a little bit. What happens with people post-hysterectomy is you will bend forward a little bit. And both of these positions are just you subconsciously trying to protect your core muscles. If you can stack them, then that means you've got some nice conscious control and you're able to use them in the way that they're supposed to be used. Your core muscles are basically anti-rotational muscles and anti-flexion muscles, so they won't need to hold you in a neutral position. So once you can do the deep breathing and the alignment, looking at things like pelvic rotations, so lie in your bed, try to do the initial part of a hip thrust, so that would just mean tilting your pelvis forwards and then tilting it back, and again just getting control over those muscles that focus on the hip joints. Then you would progress that to glute bridges, then you would progress that to hip thrusts, both without weight, both without bracing. Then you'd learn to brace again without weight. So for those who've done resistance training, that's just your Valsalva maneuver. For those who haven't done resistance training, I'm not really going to be able to explain how to do this on a podcast without giving you visuals. So I would just check out some YouTube videos into how to brace for resistance training. Once you can do that, though, once you've got conscious control over your core muscles, once you've got nice ability to breathe and use those core muscles, and you've regained the ability to brace, all you need to do at that point, which again will take somewhere between sort of 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the kind of hysterectomy you've had, is to just start resistance training as you were before, using weights that you can manage and using weights that you can control, and you will gradually build that up. The way that you would treat a hysterectomy is not too dissimilar to the way that you would treat someone who is postpartum, so someone who's had a child. And the fact of the matter is that once you've done all of that rehab stuff, there's no reason that you have to avoid anything else for the rest of your training career. You just need to start slowly. Once you've done the rehab, you do need to make sure, you need to accept that if you could deadlift 180 before, it's not a case of have a hysterectomy, do 8 weeks of rehab and then go and put 180 on the bar and try to pick it up. Like, that's not going to go very well. But if you do build yourself back up using weights that you can control and using weights that your core is able to manage, you will find yourself back to completely full fitness before you realize. And there's no reason why a year on, if you have been doing all of these rehab things, that you wouldn't be able to do back squats to full range of motion. Certainly lifting weights above 10 kilos. I get the feeling that the gynae physio was saying that during your recovery period, but they may not have appropriately communicated the fact that after the recovery period, after the rehabilitation period, you can gradually increase those weights and you can gradually just get stronger like you were doing before. There's no reason why you can't.
Yeah, awesome, Tom. Really, really, really helpful for Jan there. When we kind of reference injury and rehab and surgery and, especially off the back of something that might have happened with the NHS, I think sometimes our expectation is that there should be tons of data on lots of different surgeries and procedures and all that kind of stuff through the NHS. But, I don't blame the NHS for not having much data on this kind of stuff because, the NHS is really like an emergency service. That's how it started out. It's like, oh my God, you've got an issue. We're going to help with that and we're going to sort you out. And if you think about all the different issues that people have, all the different surgeries that people can undergo, it's just literally impossible to do these longitudinal kind of bits of research where it's really well controlled to say, okay, how do people return to weight training, after a surgery like this and what happens a year after and stuff. I don't think that data is ever really going to exist, and that's why you'll quite often see, in the 3 months post-surgery, this is what you kind of need to do. And after that, you're kind of on your own. And I think this is where, doing a little bit of self-research, finding out what other people have done, finding out what seems rational, but ultimately, as Tom said, it is a N=1 experiment. One hysterectomy will be very different for another in terms of just how the body responds to it, how you feel, how it affects your core muscles, how it affects kind of muscular activation, all of that stuff. I think it's great that you've gone to like a Pilates class. I think it's great that you're moving. All I would do now, as Tom said, is stress that movement. Like start to just slowly build yourself up. It's like an injury. You have to go in the gym and test it and go, oh, actually, it's just not quite ready for that, so I'll just stick to this stuff, and in 2 weeks' time I'll retest that. And if you can keep putting an extra 5 kilo each week on the bar, or whatever that movement, exercise, and comfortable weight is, just keep doing that, and just don't be afraid to kind of back off a little bit. But ultimately, there's got to be a point in time where you do just stress the body a little bit to say, we need to get stronger here again. And there might be a couple of sessions where there's a little bit more fatigue than you anticipated. But as long as there's not direct pain, doesn't feel like you're kind of like pulling on anything, tearing anything, there's a sharpness, it should be an okay stress, and it will be a signal where the body says, okay, that's cool, I've stressed that, it's tired, and I'm going to go away and recover before the next session.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, of course, the thing that Ben said just there about the NHS's advice not being the best is completely right. I mean, when we say that the recovery period is 3 months, that's definitely an average. Even when the physio is telling you to not lift anything above 10 kilos, that is of course going to depend on your pre-surgery strength. You'll see people who've just given birth can just go back and deadlift 100 kilos. You'll see people who've given birth and have never deadlifted before. Those two people will not have the same recovery process. But the generalities are given because generalities do suit most people. And the big thing with the 3 month rehab thing is that starts as soon as you start doing your rehab. It doesn't start as soon as you've had your surgery. So again, I'm going to reference Jessie Mundell, but one of the things that she said, which I'd never thought about before, but I thought was completely true, is that the way that a coach or a personal trainer should treat a person who's had a child is the same, regardless of how long ago that child was born. You need to do the rehab. And so if you had a child 4 months ago, or if you had a hysterectomy 4 months ago, you would be treated the same way as if you had a child or a hysterectomy 6 years ago but didn't do the rehab. Now you have done the rehab, and that means that you're in a far better position than most people would be, because you're already doing Pilates classes. But when it comes to doing things like a plank, first of all, I'm not a big fan of planks anyway. I don't think they serve a great deal of purpose. But with that besides the point, what you do is you would start with doing side planks, because a side plank's not going to put that stress on the front of the abdominal wall. And once you can do side planks for, say, a minute either side, that's when you would maybe just give a 5-second front plank a go. Maybe give that 6 seconds, 7 seconds, and just build it up over time. If you're a little bit concerned and you want a little bit of guidance, I would recommend Jessie Mundell's website. She's fantastic. She teaches our pre and postnatal module on the BTN Academy, so you know that she knows her stuff. She's from Canada, so if you email her, don't expect a reply during normal hours. But she has a program called the Core and Floor Restore, a post-baby plan that gives you your strength. I know, obviously, this is a hysterectomy is not the same as pregnancy, but a lot of the rehabilitation process matches up very, very closely. And so if you reached out to Jessie and just explained this particular issue, she'd be able to give you a little bit more guidance, because I know you've asked in your question for someone that could put you on the right path and give you some specific stuff to do. I couldn't recommend anyone more qualified, and so I'd probably check her out.
Sweet.
Cool. Flying. So, question number 3. Hi Ben, I love the content of your shows and the no BS approach to nutrition and lifestyle. Very informative and helpful. I do have a question though. Apologies if this has been covered as a topic already, but I would love an explanation on alcohol and fat loss progression versus maintenance. I understand that alcohol adds calories and it's best to stick to less sugary options such as clear spirits and soda. I also understand that you will more likely have less willpower around food after having a few drinks and when hungover, and that in the body alcohol must be metabolized by the liver before any other macronutrients. However, I've also heard that due to the effects of alcohol in the body that fat loss progression will stop for a few days also. Can you give some explanation on this, and realistically how many drinks affect progression even if food and training etc. is on track, or even if alcohol calories are accounted for, and is progression still affected in the same way if they are? Thanks so much in advance. I'm going to butcher that name. So, Imea, I apologise if I've said that completely wrong. I'm going to apologise if I've said that completely wrong. It's Eimear.
I'll let Tom dive in on this because I know he teaches and talks a lot about this in our BTN Academy nutrition course. So one thing I will say is at the beginning of this podcast, we talked a lot about specific questions and kind of going through processes. We've talked about alcohol on the show quite before, so it was really nice that Amir said, I understand this, you've gone over this before, but this, and this is like a perfect way to frame the next level of conversation to help you kind of understand this topic.
Yeah. So, what you said here is, I understand that alcohol had calories. It's best to stick to less sugary options such as clear spirits and soda water. Absolutely. If you go out to the pub and you drink pints, it's going to be in the region of 200 calories a pint. If you go out and you drink a spirit and calorie-free mixer, whether that's soda water or Diet Coke or Diet Lemonade or something, that is going to be 56 calories for a single, 112 calories for a double, which is just half the calories, so it's pretty good. I also understand that you will more likely have less willpower around food after having a few drinks and when hungover. That is the problem with alcohol. In the literature, it's quite interesting. There's been quite a lot of research done on this. One of the most interesting studies that I've seen is that one group was given wine. I think they were given like 3 glasses of wine. And then the other group was given the calorie equivalent in grape juice. So the only difference realistically was the alcohol content, and the fat loss progression was the same between the groups because the calories were accounted for. However, in the real world, what happens after you've had a bottle of wine is you also have a box of chocolates. And once you've had 8 pints, you also have a pizza. And therein lies the problem. It's the not accounting for the calories, and it's the issues that people have in terms of over-consuming food afterwards. Big thing with alcohol is it reduces your ability to taste, and so you crave stronger tasting things. So you're more likely to reach for highly salty, highly fatty foods, which generally come with an awful lot of calories. It increases your hunger sensation, and also decreases your satiation sensation, which means that you need more foods to feel full. Of course, it also increases cravings. So when you are craving more, have less willpower to say no, and require more food to satisfy your hunger, that's a problem. And so that's the big issue. Then of course, as you mentioned, when you're hungover, you crave comfort foods. There's a myth that if you eat salty, fatty foods, that will cure your hangover. It won't. All it'll do is it'll potentially add a bit of salt, which will help you get more hydrated. But realistically, all that happens is when you eat a big greasy fry up, you get a nice big hit of dopamine, and that makes you feel better. You get the same effect from a walk, but you're less likely to want to do that when you are hanging. So A hangover is not beneficial either, but you understand that already. So the big thing that you put here, though, is that alcohol must be metabolized by the liver before any other macronutrients, and that is, strictly speaking, true. Alcohol is treated in the body as basically a poison, and it must be metabolized before your body can do anything else. That only affects calorie balance, though. Once those calories are utilized, your liver is able to metabolize other things. And don't forget that it's not just your liver that metabolizes stuff. Your muscles, your brain, etc. will also metabolize non-alcohol calories. And so your body will keep ticking over pretty much as it was when you drink alcohol for practical purposes. On a biochemical level, different stuff changes. But for practical purposes, provided you account for the calories, alcohol doesn't really make that much difference. Of course, not going into the issues with general health and potential increase in risk in cancer and things like this. So to get on the big question at the end, can you give some explanation on this and realistically how many drinks affect progression even if food and training is on track? None, provided food and training is on track, other than, as I mentioned, potential issues with health. The data is fairly clear that alcohol consumption on a regular basis does increase your risk of cancer. How much that risk is increased pretty much depends on how much you drink, and it is your choice whether you are considering that risk to be worth the reward. The risk does seem relatively low, and I've seen the data and I still drink, so you can take from that what it's worth. How many drinks affects progression? I would say, well, what we do know is that roughly 2 units will not affect muscle protein synthesis, but anything more than that will. So if you are training and then go on and having a few beers after training and you have more than sort of 2, that is going to limit your muscle protein synthesis. That is potentially going to limit your muscle gain and potential. And so I wouldn't drink heavily on training days, at least. But realistically, when we look at muscle protein synthesis, it doesn't just happen on the day you train. Muscle protein synthesis is a long-term thing. When you train, your muscles will be growing, so to speak, for about 72 hours if you train them properly. And so if you train on Friday and then go out on the piss on Saturday, that is, to an extent, limiting your muscle growth potential. How much that limit is very difficult to quantify, but just know that it is limiting it, and so that is a cost that you have to take into consideration. In terms of fat loss, though, it's not going to make a huge difference, again, provided you're not getting hammered all the time, because that could potentially limit. So during fat loss, muscle protein breakdown is elevated because you're in a calorie deficit. You then require muscle protein synthesis to maintain your muscle mass. If you are drinking very heavily during a fat loss approach, that potentially limits that, and so you are running the risk of gaining more muscle. Note that I am couching a lot of these in mights and possiblies and might be because the data just isn't there. I'm extrapolating from short-term studies into long-term results, which is something that's not that easy to do, but the data does seem to suggest that if you're drinking heavily, that's not going to be congruent with muscle gain or muscle retention, but that's an if. But in terms of how much weight you'll lose, how much fat you'll lose, provided the calories are accounted for, it shouldn't make a difference. The difficulty comes in actually accounting for those calories. So that sort of rambly answer, I hope, addresses most of what is in this question.
As with the last question, you have to find your sweet spot with how you can safely have alcohol in your diet. I'm fortunate from, I suppose, a muscle building perspective in that any more than 2 drinks for me and I have an effect the next day. So if I was to have 3 pints, I would feel it the next day. If I have 2 pints, I'm usually like absolutely fine unless it had really high alcohol content. Also for me, that's an enjoyable amount. It's also not an expensive amount because, you know, alcohol could get quite expensive quite quickly. And for me, I suppose personally, I have quite a relaxed approach to alcohol. I am quite often traveling a lot, doing a lot, and I will drink more. But it's always controlled. It's always within what I would describe what is my calorie limit. I track my daily calorie intake every day, but I don't track my macronutrient intake. It's literally just my calorie intake. So this week I'm traveling a lot, and I'll probably drink nearly every day this week, but it'll just be 1, maybe 2 beers. That's it. And then the week after, I'll probably not drink at all. So it really does come fits and starts. But for me, I have a very healthy relationship with alcohol. Tom, do you find you have an effect after a certain amount of drinks?
So I've been quoted in the past as saying that I bounce. I don't get hangovers. So I think I've had one hangover in my life.
Come on, what?
Yeah, one hangover. Until last year, I thought the headache after drinking was a myth. Like, I'd never experienced that in my entire life. The worst I get is about half an hour of nausea when I wake up, regardless of how drunk I get. It's brilliant.
Wow.
It's a talent, shall we say. But no, the way that I would advise you think about alcohol is this. So, according to some epidemiological studies, any amount of alcohol over 0 increases your risk of breast cancer. So, if you have one drink a week, that is potentially going to increase your risk of breast cancer. That's an epidemiological study, however, and so we can only take the data for what it's worth. Other randomized controlled trials that look at mechanisms suggest that it might reduce the risk of breast cancer because of alcohol's effect on estrogen. So who knows? The way that I would practically view alcohol consumption is if you're having 1 or 2 drinks a couple times a week, don't worry about it. If you're drinking to the point that if you told somebody how much you drink, they'd be like, "Oh, that's quite a lot, isn't it?" Then that's probably drinking too much. If you have a beer, even 5 times a week, some evidence suggests that that's not the best thing for you, and so you should probably cut down. But if you're comfortable with the fact that some evidence might suggest that maybe that's not the best thing in the world over the long term, and you're comfortable with that, then that's fine. The way I personally treat alcohol is I'll try to limit myself to 5 drinks a week. I don't often succeed, but that's what I try to do. And that's probably the most evidence-based way to look at it, looking at all of the data collectively and not putting too much stock in epidemiological research. But yeah, I think pragmatically, if you're not drinking to the point that you're drunk often, you're probably okay.
Yeah, again, personal circumstances are really important. When we look at research data as well, I always kind of take the view that I have to look at my own situation and compare it to the mean data kind of in that research. And I genuinely, hand on heart, and people can argue with me at their will, hand on heart, I'll say that my diet is better than 99% of people. I eat good 10 portions of fruit and veg every day. I've just had a green smoothie for breakfast, which has had 5 or 6 portions of fruit and vegetable in it. I get out, I move, I walk, I'm mindful. Stress, I would say, is kind of well balanced. I really think my kind of environment really supports being healthy. So when we look at potential negative things, like, let's just classify alcohol as negative for the purpose of this conversation. When I put it into my mix, I think it's such a minor thing, and that my body can deal with it in such a it can deal with it, basically. I don't feel it's ever really a problem, and I have enough self-awareness and value of my health that if it became a problem, then I would just take it out, because I'm, again, seeing a negative effect. Now, we can't always have a data point for this kind of stuff. Like, there's only so much research we have on certain things, and that's why Tom has said, in this situation, kind of data says this, but it can't really support that. And at some point, we've got to navigate how we feel about that data, what our goals are, and then how we feel in the situation. How does alcohol actually make us feel? So that's kind of my stance on it, and how I would maybe justify my approach to alcohol within my lifestyle.
Yeah, so I've just dragged up some of the notes from the BTN Academy on alcohol, just to give you a idea of just how confused the data is on this. So an intake of up to 20 grams per day of ethanol, so that's 2 units, was not associated with hypertension. An intake of 34 grams per day was, with blood pressure then increasing above this level. Looking specifically at middle-class women with a healthy lifestyle, those who drank 0.1 to 5 grams per day, so 1 to 3 drinks per week, had the lowest blood pressure, while those drinking more than 30 grams per day were at greatest risk. Diabetes, drinking up to 15 grams of alcohol, is associated with a reduced risk of diabetes. Drinking more than 30 grams per day is associated with an increased risk. Coronary heart disease shows an inverse relationship with alcohol, with drinking 3 to 4 days a week reducing risk. An intake of over 30 grams per day is associated with an increase in risk for one type of colorectal cancer and an 84% increased risk in another. But it's important to note that this is an increase in background risk rather than total risk, so that's not actually as big as it sounds. Breast cancer is related very closely to alcohol. So 10 grams per day increases risk by 10%. 30 grams per day increases risk by 30%. Roughly 6% of breast cancer cases in the UK have been linked to alcohol consumption. That is probably the one that I would pay the most attention to. Those drinking 10 grams of alcohol per day have greater bone density in the lumbar spine than those who don't drink, though high intake is associated with lower bone density. Like, are you starting to get the message here? After a diagnosis of diabetes, those who drink alcohol are less likely to get cardiovascular problems. Thanks to gallbladder emptying, alcohol has a very close relationship with reduced risk of gallstones. Women who abstained or drank 30 grams of alcohol per day are at greatest risk of all-cause mortality. So those drinking between 0.1 and 29.9 grams of alcohol per day are at a reduced risk of all-cause mortality. Like, the data is absolutely all over the place. Alcohol seems to increase risk of some things, it decreases risk of other things. It depends how much you drink as to what the risk is. And honestly, the evidence-based position is alcohol is probably a negative after a certain amount, but as Ben mentions, the rest of the lifestyle needs to be taken into account too, and we don't know how much of a problem low to moderate alcohol consumption realistically is. The data just isn't there. We know that massive intakes are not good for you, but beyond that, who knows?
Tom, is this where an individual can maybe look at their genetic predisposition to some stuff and the data? So let's say if there was a female and their mum had breast cancer, would they be more inclined to pay attention to that data and say, okay, there's a bit of a family history there, I need to be a little bit more mindful?
Oh, for sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. Like, if you've got a history of breast cancer in the family, then reducing your alcohol intake, which your doctor's already probably told you to do, wouldn't be a bad idea. Now, that's not saying you have to absolutely abstain, but that means that if you're the type of person that has a glass of wine every night, that might not be the best habit for you in your particular genetic situation. Though, again, that's just in extrapolation from the data. Like, that's not been directly shown, but it does make an awful lot of sense based on the information that the research has provided. And yet again, a lot of this is taken from epidemiological research, so who knows?
Awesome. Right, I'm going to end the show there because I've actually got to go. I felt I muddled my words a couple of times earlier, especially when we were talking about the alcohol thing. So I apologise if I sound a little bit but that is the sound of my brain working sometimes, and I just have to roll with it. Thank you to everyone that wrote into the show. Amazing questions. It spurred some great topics. We've waffled on for 52 minutes, so we ended up having something to say. If you would like your question asked in the show or answered in the show, please email bencoomber@gmail.com with the subject line podcast, and we'll throw it into the mix, because as it stands, we have no questions left. Sad face emoji. Otherwise, plant-based nutrition cookbook on the Awesome Supplements website. Practical Academy, September is our next intake. Otherwise, all that's left for me to do is say goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.
And go and have an awesome day. Goodbye.